Okay, so let's talk about one of the biggest, most debated mysteries in the entire book of Revelation, the 144,000. Who are they? You've probably heard all sorts of theories. Are they a literal army? Is it just a symbolic number? Well, today, we're diving deep into a really fascinating interpretation that connects them to some of the most dramatic events in the whole Bible. Let's get into it.
So here's our game plan. We'll start by unpacking the mystery itself and look at the three main ideas about who these people are. Then, we're going to zero in on one specific viewpoint, one that challenges a really popular theory and suggests a surprising link between the 144,000, the famous two witnesses, and a final, urgent message for the entire world.
All right, let's set the scene. The book of Revelation paints this absolutely incredible picture. You've got a very specific group, 144,000 strong, standing victorious with the Lamb on a heavenly Mount Zion. I mean, the vision is so vivid, but who they actually are, that has been a puzzle for centuries.
And that's really the million-dollar question, isn't it? Are we talking about a literal group of people? Is it symbolic? And what's their ultimate purpose? According to the perspective we're exploring today, the answer to that question completely reframes how you look at the entire end-time story.
This right here is the verse that starts it all. And you got to pay attention to the details because they're crucial. They're with the Lamb, the number is exact, and they are marked, sealed, right on their foreheads with the names of the Father and the Son. This tells you right away, this isn't just any random crowd. They are a distinct, specially chosen group.
So, naturally, people have been trying to solve this puzzle for a long time. And according to our source, the different ideas generally fall into three main camps. And let me tell you, each one has totally different implications.
Okay, so here are the three big theories. First up, you have the idea that this is a literal group of 144,000 Jewish men from the tribes of Israel. The second view says, no, the number is symbolic and it actually represents the entire church, all believers throughout history. And then there's the third view, and this is the one we're going to focus on, that says they are a literal group but a different one, God's specially chosen servants for a very unique end times mission.
Now, to really get what our source is arguing, we first have to talk about the idea it's pushing back against. See that literal Jews interpretation? It comes from a whole system of theology known as dispensationalism.
So what is dispensationalism? Well, the core idea is that God has worked with humanity in different ways during different eras of history. But the most important piece of the puzzle for us today is this. It draws a really sharp dividing line between God's plan for the nation of Israel and his plan for the church. It basically sees them as two different people with two very different destinies. And this belief leads to a very specific timeline for the end times. In this view, the church age we're in now is just a temporary phase. Then, right before a final 7-year period of global crisis known as the tribulation, the church is suddenly whisked away from earth in an event called the rapture. And that clears the world stage so that final period can focus almost entirely on the nation of Israel.
Okay, so here's the core critique from our source. This interpretation essentially takes the church off the playing field for the final, most intense chapter of human history. The argument is that this can lead to a kind of complacency, a mindset that believers won't actually have to face or endure that final global test.
So if the church isn't removed before the end, well, what does that mean for the 144,000? This is where our source proposes a really powerful and dramatic alternative for who they are. This is where it gets interesting.
And here it is. This is the big idea, the absolute heart of the argument. The source claims that we shouldn't be looking at the 144,000 and the two witnesses as two separate groups. Instead, the name two witnesses is actually a symbolic title for the mission that is carried out by the entire group of the 144,000. They are one and the same.
And if you look at their qualifications, the Bible gives them a stunning resume. They're described as having this absolute spiritual purity and unwavering devotion to the Lamb. And they're called the first fruits. In the ancient world, the first fruits were the very best part of the harvest, the part you offered up to God. It means this is a special, set-apart group with a single, critical purpose.
So, if they have this special mission, what in the world is it? Well, their job is to preach what Revelation calls the eternal gospel, which is basically a final global warning and call to humanity right before the end.
And this final message comes in three powerful, distinct parts. First, it's a call. Fear God, because the time for judgment is here. Then a declaration. The corrupt world system called Babylon is finished. It has fallen. And finally, it ends with what is probably the most severe warning in the entire Bible. Whatever you do, do not worship the beast or take his mark, because the consequences are eternal.
Now, as you can imagine, a mission like that puts them on a direct collision course with the powers of the world, and it leads to one of the most incredible, dramatic storylines in all of prophecy. So let's map out their journey.
And this timeline, it's just incredible. It starts with them being sealed and commissioned for their task. For the next 1,260 days, that's 3.5 years, they preach this final message with divine, miraculous power. But then at the midpoint, their protection is lifted and they are overcome and martyred by the beast, as the whole world celebrates their death. But the story is far from over. 3.5 days later, as the world is literally watching on their screens, they are miraculously resurrected and ascend to heaven in a stunning, final testimony to God's power.
And this is where their journey comes full circle. After being martyred on earth and taken up to heaven, our source identifies them as those victorious armies dressed in white who return with Christ for the final battle. So in this view, they aren't just victims of the end times. They are the ultimate victors.
So, it all comes down to this. In this interpretation, the 14,000 aren't just some theological curiosity for us to debate. They are God's final megaphone to a world in crisis. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. Maybe the most important question isn't just figuring out who they are, but whether we'd be prepared to recognize and hear their message if we heard it today.